Iran's supreme leader is reportedly hiding in a fortified underground shelter. The Jerusalem Post says the Islamic leader's hideout contains a series of tunnels below Tehran. The Post cites an Iranian opposition outlet saying the Ayatollah's third son has taken over management of the supreme leader's day-to-day responsibilities. The son is now serving as the primary channel for communication with the regime's executive branches. This comes after President Trump said that American ships were en route to waters near the country. And joining us now is David Wurmser, Middle East Affairs Analyst at the Center for Security Policy and former Senior Advisor to U.S. Vice President Cheney on the Middle East and Strategic Affairs. David, thank you so much for joining us. Always great to see you. Now, the U.S. has moved military assets into the region after President Trump told reporters Thursday, quote, "We have a big force going toward Iran," adding while he'd rather not see anything happen, we're watching them very closely. Now, this comes as Iran has warned any attack will be seen as all-out war. How are you reading these moves and what we can expect to see here?
Well, clearly the president is moving enough assets into place that he has all the options on the table. If we're going to do a strike on Iran, he's within a day at the outermost. We will have the assets in place to do so. Certainly the Israelis are working with the United States to complete the intelligence picture and make sure that all the targets and targeted leadership that may be on the table is identified. Their locations are nailed down and so forth. So there's a lot of preparatory work that's happening, but is about to be completed. So then we get into the period in which the president either decides to actually strike or tries to lean on the Iranians enough, making it clear to them that we have everything we need to do a strike to hopefully make them buckle. And buckling in this case would mean some sort of a fundamental change in the constitution of the regime.
And despite the internet blackout, the scale of the protests in Iran and the bloody clampdown is slowly coming into focus. How are you reading these protests? Is there lasting momentum in spite of the brutal clampdown?
Well, there's a number of lasting elements, as you said. One is lasting momentum. Not all the protests are over. There are still cities and towns in Iran where there's opposition and there's still activity by the opposition. There's also preparation for the future and waiting for what's about to come, if it's an American strike, an Israeli strike, or both. But there's also a long-term hatred of the regime now that has set in among the Iranian people. Before it was a divorce. They had given up on the regime. They want to change. Now there's real hatred of the regime because of what they've done. You mentioned the suppression. What is coming out now, it seems on the night of the 8th and 9th, between the 8th and 9th of January, the regime killed as many as 30,000 people in that one 24-hour period, which would be one of the most horrific slaughters of humans anywhere, within a short period of time by any regime in the last century. So it really is a horrific regime that has killed. We don't know how many people. We don't know the parameters even of how many people, but it does seem now well north of 40 to 50,000 people have been killed by the regime over the last week and a half.
And on that note, we do know that earlier in the protests, Iran used military jammers, reportedly from Russia or China, to shut down Starlink access. Could there be cooperation between the Chinese regime and the Iranian regime?
Yes, the Chinese regime and the Russian regime both helped not only to jam Starlink, but to try to follow the leads to the Starlink sites inside Iran so that they could track down the leadership of the opposition, arrest them, and kill them. So we do know that there's extensive assistance by the Chinese and the Russians, especially the Chinese, to Iran. We have seen, I believe, 26 transports from China in the last 72 hours land in Iran. That's a lot of military transport from China in a very short period of time. We know that they've also sent anti-aircraft and anti-missile systems not true anti-missile systems, but anti-aircraft systems to Iran. So there's a lot of military cooperation by China against the United States and Israel in a potential conflict here with Iran.
And what is Beijing's interest in the region? Why are they helping so much?
Well, I think there's a number of interests. First and foremost is they simply want the United States to stumble. So anything they can do to make the United States stumble is good. But I think there's a more serious issue here. Iran has been one of the most repressive regimes for the last 50 years. It's really a symbol of that camp of repressive regimes that include countries like Cuba, North Korea, China, and what was Syria and so forth. It is one of the main countries in that camp. If it goes down to a freedom revolution, it will send ripples and shockwaves to Beijing. We remember how the collapse of the Soviet Union led to Tiananmen Square. We could easily see this fervor, this feeling of a freedom type aspirations by people suddenly show up in various of these terribly repressive regimes, whether it's Cuba or even China. So obviously China doesn't want to deal with that. They do not want to see the voice of freedom be a successful voice.
Now, we saw in the first Trump administration the Abraham Accords. Now, this time around, President Trump has established the Board of Peace. What's your take on that and what role it could play in the Middle East?
Well, the Board of Peace is a very complex body that he's setting up. I'm not sure it'll really succeed, but its real purpose, in my view, is first and foremost to supplant and to erode the UN structure, which has obviously failed and is dominated by forces that are inherently anti-American, anti-Western. So I think he's right to try to create an alternative structure, whether it succeeds or not, that at the very least unravels the dominance and dangerous game that the UN has been playing over the last decades. So I think that's good. By the way, the UN is also another issue of China and why China's very nervous about some of these developments. It has effectively managed to take over a lot of these NGO structures like the World Health Organization and so forth through debt to some countries that then feel indebted and diplomatically support their efforts and so forth. So this Board of Peace, I think, is very important in terms of undermining that international structure that has arisen over the last decades that's inimical to the West. But it may not work in itself, but that's not its primary purpose. Its primary purpose is first and foremost to push the UN off to the side.
And David, when we look to the future of Iran, talk to us about the different factions and interests within the country. What would an Iran not under the current regime look like?
Well, the big question is, first of all, the Shah himself, the son of the last Shah of Iran, who was exiled and died in exile. His son is technically the Shah. There's a lot of debate over whether he's a real leader or not. One thing we do know is that a number of the opposition forces that had claimed to have such operational capacity in the country showed that they really didn't lately, whereas the Shah is what the Iranian people have been calling for. Javed Shah is the slogan used in this revolt, and that means long live the Shah, long live the king. So he clearly has currency, but he himself, from what I understand from him, as well as those around him, he really doesn't want to be the operational leader of Iran. He wants to be the symbol of Iranian unity and the force around which the nation gathers. But he himself does not want to get down into the nitty-gritty of running the country afterwards. He wants to be what is more genuinely a constitutional monarch. So that really leads to the question that you're getting at, is who then leads Iran for real if he's just the symbol. And that really is, I believe, the leadership of the Iranians in Iran right now. There clearly is a leadership behind this revolt, this uprising. They clearly have been baptized by fire. And I think we don't know who they are. They're not visible to us on the outside, but they're clearly there. And I believe that you're going to see them rise and identify as the regime goes down.
And zooming out a bit, what are you watching for in terms of how this could play out? Because looking at history, for example, there was the Arab Spring that swept across the Middle East. Some areas did, get a little better. Life, got better. But some other areas became hot spots for terrorism or terrorist strongholds. What are you watching for in terms of how this plays out, especially maybe in other countries like Cuba or even China?
Right. Well, the Arab Spring led to an Islamist winter, and that's what we're seeing in various countries, and that's one of the problems of it. Now, Iran, you have an Islamist regime. In fact, it's an Islamist regime that has strong communist overlay. It was a coalition between the communists and the Islamists in 1979 that came to power. So when the Iranians reject the regime, they're rejecting both the Islamism as well as the communism that led to it. Those of us who deal with the Iranian communities, both those who were exiled and those who have come out of Iran since 1979, no, this is an incredibly sophisticated leadership or a society, refined society, a very European-like society, modern, more like Europe or Japan or so forth, and their capabilities and their skill sets and so forth, and their political outlook. So I'm pretty bullish on what Iran will look like afterwards. They have a lot of problems that this regime is bequeathing to the future generations. But they're a fairly industrious crowd, and I think they'll be very pro-American and quite willing to align with countries like India and Israel and that alliance in the region. So I'm pretty optimistic for the people there.
Well, David Wurmser, as always, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.